right. So thank you again, Dr. Charles. I do want to give you one more round of applause because that was so good and really, really helpful to hear. So now we're going to do 3 lightning round talks. They'll be about 20 minutes apiece. And again, as you're hearing people speak, we'll have the networking hour and conversation afterwards. So please do keep track of questions that you might have. All of our wonderful speakers have agreed to be there, and thank you so much for your time. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Professor Chris Coleman here, who will be talking from the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences about arts after the NFT storm. So, Professor Coleman.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm Professor Chris Coleman. I teach in emergent digital practices. I have been a digital artist for about 25 years, teaching digital arts for 20 years. I've been collecting digital art for about 15 years. Of course, a lot of things changed just a couple of years ago. And I've been an active participant in this kind of craziness and speculative market that was NFTs. That includes collecting more than 6,000 artworks in the last 2 years and selling several thousand of my own. This talk is a little bit of trying to look at the pieces that are left over. Most digital artists are a little bit happy that most of the speculative market is moving on to something else. It wasn't healthy. It paid some people's rent for a year, which was great, but it's not something that was sustainable, and I think we all knew it. And so the question is, like, yeah, what comes out of the other side? So that's kind of what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to go over the whole history of the NFT ups and downs. You can read funny pieces in the New York Times if you'd like to do that. But I'll say here that there are a few sort of clusters of things that are worth discussing. One of the pieces is this idea of art marketplaces and the contracts that are involved in selling artwork on the blockchain as NFTs. We did see something emerge that I'm very excited about, which was a platform not funded by venture capitalists and extracted for all of its worth, but instead community owned and community run, which is this one in particular is TEA, which is sort of emerged out of a movement in Brazil to sort of own your own platform, have the artists and the collectors involved in the platform make all the executive decisions using a DAO token or a decentralized, oh no, I just forgot what DAO means. Autonomous organization, thank you. And so they give tokens, and the tokens let you vote, and people vote to decide what the platform is doing. And there's a percentage that's taken off from the platform to pay for things like developers and maintainers and server costs. And I'm really interested in, artist and art collector owned markets as a way forward in a much more healthy environment. It's also resulted in a couple other kind of DAOs. This one in particular called Refraction DAO. They recently had a festival here in Denver, actually, as part of Ethereum Denver. But the Refraction DAO is a system whereby it's kind of like an arts and music festival that is traveling around the world. And it's driven by decisions made, again, through these autonomous tokens. People vote with their purchasing power, but also just vote by being long-term members and even volunteering. Like, I showed up and helped out with setting up the particular Denver edition, and I got voting tokens for that. So like my ongoing participation drives the sort of function of these organizations. And Refraction is really interesting because they're commissioning new art, music, and performances from different cultural institutions and individual artists to keep this movement going and to make something that maybe couldn't emerge if you're talking about a normal kind of music festival, which is driven by large-scale record companies and their various interests. This is like direct from the artists. I think another prominent example is Friends with Benefits, which is out of the San Francisco and LA area, but they're also running around doing lots of fun parties all over the country. But an idea that you buy into the DAO, you agree on things that you want to do, social activities is really their focus, and they just throw amazing parties where all the members get together, and everybody has sort of like fundraised this through the lens of the DAO itself. I think another huge change that's come about is the fact that as the markets have collapsed, all of the sort of sense of exclusivity really dropped out of the platforms. Platforms like Foundation quickly found themselves, instead of being a highly curated, very controlled space for whether or not you as an artist could put your work there, quickly slid to anybody can post anything here, and we hope it's good, and you can find something good if you want. And it's been an ongoing conversation about this notion of what is gatekeeping, what is curation, what does it mean to go to a marketplace where you can see anything, and maybe not all of it is art, and maybe you are there for art, and maybe you're not. So it's really been interesting to watch all of these platforms kind of race to this particular space. In turn, I think what's been really interesting and happening is the ability for artists to make their own contracts and not use platforms at all. And I think this has been the most interesting evolution, driven by companies like Manifold, and I think there's also a company called Transits. I don't remember their name. Most of my friends are using Manifold, but this is basically a GUI website for you to be able to make a new contract particular to your specifications on the Ethereum blockchain, and then actually spin up a quick website that allows you to sell these artworks. That website goes away when all the artworks are sold. And so you're not making a new platform, you're solely just like making a space to sell, and then all of that work is available in the future. Well, no, it's a weird thing to explain. All of that work is in everybody's wallets on the Ethereum blockchain, and so then websites like OpenSea allow you to see that work, but there are many other mechanisms for you to see the work as well. But again, letting artists create their own contract and not having to use a platform at all has been a really interesting change. I think one of the biggest issues that we've seen come out of this whole marketplace collapse has been also the collapse of royalties. We're 2 years in, and it suddenly artists found out that all of this discussion about the power of NFTs finally giving royalties to the artists, with the idea that, you know, unlike selling your work at Christie's or Sotheby's, if an artist becomes famous later in life and your work goes from $5 to $5,000, you should actually get some of that money when your work is sold again for a higher price. This is what an artist would say. And this is the reason we were so excited about NFTs and royalties. It turned out that royalties weren't in the contract. And so in fact, platforms like Blur and then OpenSea started to strip those royalties out and not give money to the artists on secondary sales. And it's been a really uncomfortable space and moment, because again, new companies came into the space. They competed with OpenSea by not enforcing royalties, and so royalties fell apart, and then OpenSea followed suit. The argument from the people who were here for speculation and don't give a shit about art, excuse my French, is that they should never have been paying artists royalties. How dare you try and get money off of my speculative purchasing and sales? And you're slowing down the market by having such things in place. So it's this battle between being a speculative asset versus being art that's meant to be collected and enjoyed. So this has been a sort of ongoing battle that we're dealing with right now. There are some incoming additions to the Ethereum contracts that are going to try and fix this, but I don't know, we'll see. I'll also say that one of the things that has emerged throughout this period, and I think is really interesting and worth looking at, is the evolution of art that was created specifically to speak to and utilize the blockchain itself. I'm really interested in this project, Wides by Sterling Crispin, who is actually from the area. This Wides project actually uses a very interesting smart contract which downloads the CryptoPunks, which you've probably heard about in the news, a very old NFT. And every time it's bought or sold, the JPEG of the CryptoPunk is recomputed and stretched to the point where the final form of the Wides CryptoPunk is only 2 pixels stretched across the entire screen, fully decimating that image. So again, the contract itself is what's doing that sort of image destruction or image manipulation. And so you kind of have this conversation about whether or not you sell your Wides, because if it's sold, then it gets stretched. Other artists have been doing things like these trading cards called art cards by Landlines. These were really beautiful, where you would buy different packs of trading cards like Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever, and you would see what packs you got, and then you combine them to create a new artwork. And that was all done on chain. As you burned your cards, and an artwork would emerge. Again, a really sort of beautiful project that had many different kinds of results and a different way of thinking about generativity, but also like co-designing and collaboration between the buyer and the artist themselves. Another artist who's really taken this on quite a bit is Rhea Myers, who's really well known in terms of working on sort of the meta topic of the blockchain itself. Rhea is actually selling this, which is the null address for the Ethereum blockchain, with the idea that, you know, at this particular address, which nobody can ever own, are a whole bunch of code messes. So like when people write smart contracts and they mess something up and the computer spits out a whole bunch of zeros instead, there's a whole bunch of things that have been sent to this address. And additionally, some people use this as the burn address, which is a notion that we were talking about this, Dr. Charles was talking about immutability. You can't erase an NFT from the blockchain, but you can send it to an address that nobody ever can see or look at. It's known as a burn address. So this is also a burn address for some people. So it's a kind of a pile of rejects exist at this address somehow. And then I think the other big change that's happened in terms of thinking about this kind of art utilizing the blockchain is that generative art, which was kind of, for a little while, the, I don't know, the special child of NFTs, which was this idea that you would almost like, you would pay for a piece of artwork, you would have a general sense of what the result might be, but your own edition of that artwork was generated when you actually purchase it, because the hashtag and the hash and the actual smart contract actually generate the artwork itself. And for a lot of this generative artwork, the code for the artwork was embedded in the blockchain. This is considered very purist because you could somehow recover the art completely from the blockchain. I think an interesting shift that's happened is, again, there's been this sort of co-authorship that's starting to emerge, where when you go to buy a piece of artwork, this is an example from something called FX Hash, where you're given a whole bunch of sliders and color options, and you can actually go in and co-author the artwork within a framework that the artist has set up. So instead of being like a lottery ticket, like you make a generative art piece and maybe you hate it, but there's nothing you can do about it. In this particular case, you can generate these artworks. You know, the artwork is set up, the artist has set up a whole framework, but you can carefully co-design with the artist to create something together. And there's something really interesting about that. And even with the smart contracts, you can make it so that the person who did all of the design in the parameters can actually be part of receiving secondary royalties afterwards, which has been really interesting. And then the last space that's been emerged out of all of this mess is new ways of thinking about ownership and archiving in terms of NFTs and art. One of the things that's been happening more and more, these are two examples from my personal collection, where artists have sold me a sculpture and it comes with an NFT as provenance. So these artists have committed to this as a way of doing provenance, as opposed to giving me a paper certificate, which I'm supposed to sort of like keep and not lose somewhere. So this has been an interesting attachment. This is by Sterling Crispin. This particular piece is by Aria Harvey. Again, this isn't a direct reference to the sculpture, but she says here that the NFT serves as a collectible along with the sculpture. While they're not inextricably linked to one another and can be separated, this image serves as a companion to that physical sculpture and can be used as a certificate of authenticity if the sculpture changes hands. Whereas Sterling clearly says the owner of this NFT will also own the physical work, and this relationship should not be broken. So neither of these, you can't make a smart contract that actually makes somebody do something in the real world, but the intention of the artist is there at least forever in the blockchain. And then I would say that when it has started to happen, I think the thing that everybody who bought NFTs as a speculative asset is they were dreaming that museums would collect the artworks and suddenly they would become rich because the MoMA would give them $1 million for their CryptoPunk. This was the insanity. Of course, instead, what the museums are doing is working directly with artists to create works which take on and think about the blockchain. And so we've seen that especially with a recent commission and acquisition with the AKG Museum in Buffalo, who's just acquired a number of works. Beyond that, a lot of other previous acquisitions have actually been donations. So there's a person who donated a whole bunch of NFTs to the Perez Museum in Miami. But I think we're more interested in when do museums think that this is something that they should take on? But because NFTs and the artwork in particular exist solely on the blockchain, and or mostly all of them exist in something called the interplanetary file system, hilariously named, which is a node-based decentralized file system. Most of all of the artwork that's ever been created exists there, not actually on the blockchain. And Dr. Charles, again, was referring to that the blockchain can't actually hold like a JPEG. Or not at least efficiently. So everybody started realizing, holy crap, I have 6,000 pieces of art, and at any moment, the interplanetary file system could go down, or the platform could go kaput, and these files could go away. What do we do? How do we start thinking about preserving these? A new company, Club NFT, has started up. It's very fun, but they offer two things simultaneously. One is to be able to download all of the files associated with your NFT, which includes, an HTML with all of the text and description and other things, as well as the artwork itself, which I would call the JPEG or the movie file. But they also offer pinning as a service, where pinning is a way to tell the interplanetary file system, hey, even if that platform goes down, I care about this artwork and I want you to keep it available, which is a really interesting longer conversation that we don't have time for. This is a lightning talk and I'm talking at 100 miles a minute. I would also say here that one of the other things that's starting to happen, again, through the lens of DAOs, there's a gallery called Transfer, who's been thinking about digital art and collecting digital art for over a decade. They have added a proposal through Filecoin, but they're actually thinking about it more broadly as well, which is how do we, instead of taking the load from the interplanetary file system, how do we instead disperse the load amongst the artists and collectors? And so they're projecting a way to have basically everybody run a little NOS, that run a little hard drive in their house that has a little microcomputer in it, that would basically be connected to the internet and make it their own sort of version of the file system, but that's dedicated to arts and is supported by the artist and the collectors themselves, and take that load away from companies that don't have any skin in the game. So we're really excited to see some of this stuff emerge and possibly make a better future for digital arts than when we went into this giant mess. Thank you.